I never thought a farm could feel hostile. When my father told me we'd inherited my late uncle's land in rural Nebraska, I imagined wide skies, golden wheat fields, and the quiet kind of life you see in postcards. My uncle Raymond had lived alone out here for as long as I could remember. No wife, no kids, barely any visitors. He died suddenly of what the coroner called cardiac arrest, though the locals whispered about stranger circumstances. The drive up was eerily empty. Endless fields on either side, fences half collapsed, and wind that whistled through the grass like it had a voice of its own. My mom kept saying how peaceful it was. My dad muttered something about finally being free of the city. But my little sister, Emily, kept staring out the window, whispering, "It's watching us." When we arrived, the farmhouse stood like a relic. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and the windows reflected the sky in a way that made them look blind. But what drew my eyes immediately was the scarecrow. It stood in the middle of the largest field, tall and crooked, dressed in ragged overalls and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed its face. From the car, it looked like a man frozen mid-stride, arms out, straw jutting through its sleeves like bone. Something about it felt wrong. "Creepy thing, huh?" Dad chuckled. "Guess Uncle Ray wanted to keep the crows away." But I couldn't help noticing there weren't any crows in the sky. Not a single bird. Just silence, except for the wind. That night, while we unpacked, Emily refused to sleep in her own room. She cried until my mom let her stay with me. I woke around midnight to the sound of creaking, wood groaning like footsteps across the porch. I sat up, heart hammering. But when I peeked through the curtains, nothing was there. Nothing except the scarecrow. It wasn't standing in the field anymore. It was closer, maybe 50 yards from the house. Arms still spread, hat still low, but I swear its head tilted ever so slightly toward my window. I told myself it was my imagination, shadows playing tricks on me. But when I closed the curtain, Emily whispered, almost asleep, "I told you it's watching." The next morning, I rushed to the window to see if the scarecrow was still where I'd seen it last night. My stomach turned when I saw it standing back in the middle of the field, in its original position. I didn't tell my parents what I thought I'd seen. They'd laugh it off. But Emily tugged my sleeve at breakfast and whispered, "It moved again, didn't it?" I didn't answer. The day passed with my dad exploring the barn and the equipment, muttering about how much work it would take to get the place running again. Mom was cleaning inside, while Emily refused to leave the porch. Every time I glanced at her, her eyes were locked on the scarecrow, like she was afraid to look away. That night, the creaking returned, louder this time. I lay in bed, holding my breath, listening as the sound circled the house. It was rhythmic, steady, like deliberate footsteps crunching through dirt. I finally built up the nerve to peek again. My chest tightened. The scarecrow was closer, now only 20 yards away. I could make out its burlap sack head, roughly stitched with crude X's for eyes and a black slash for a mouth. But what made my skin crawl was that the straw beneath its overalls seemed damp, almost glistening, as if soaked in something dark. I dropped the curtain and crawled back into bed. That's when I heard it, faint scratching at the window. Emily bolted upright, eyes wide. "It wants to come inside." I froze, my throat locked, every instinct screaming to run. But after a long minute, the scratching stopped. When morning came, Dad stormed into the kitchen looking furious. "Who the hell was out in the fields last night?" he demanded. We stared at him blankly. He said he'd found tracks in the dirt, circling the house, footprints too large to belong to any of us. They trailed off back into the field, ending right where the scarecrow stood. Emily burst into tears. "It's not supposed to leave the field," she sobbed. My mom snapped at her, asking what she meant. But Emily just shook her head and muttered, "Uncle Ray told me." The room fell silent. None of us had seen Uncle Ray in years before he died, and Emily had never met him. That night, Dad double-checked all the doors and windows, grumbling about kids sneaking around. But I couldn't shake what Emily said. Uncle Ray told me. She was only 6. She couldn't have made that up. While my parents slept, I snuck down into the living room where the old family boxes were stacked. Uncle Ray had left behind journals, papers, and a battered photo album. Most of it was farming notes, harvest records, weather reports, but tucked between the pages was something stranger. A hand-drawn map of the fields, and on it, a circle drawn around the scarecrow's location. In thick red pen, Uncle Ray had written, "Never let him cross the line." My stomach dropped. I flipped to the next page. Scrawled notes filled the margins. "He doesn't like birds. He moves when no one watches. Blood keeps him fed." I slammed the book shut, heart racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? But then I remembered the damp, dark straw I'd seen in its arms. The house was dead silent until I heard the front porch creak. I froze, clutching the book, listening as heavy steps pressed down on the boards outside. Then, a slow dragging sound, like something scraping across the wood. Emily suddenly screamed upstairs. I bolted to her room. She was standing on the bed, pointing at the window. The scarecrow's face was right there against the glass. Burlap stretched into a crude grin, stitches straining as if something inside was pressing outwards. Its hat scraped the top of the frame, and for the first time, I realized just how tall it really was. Dad burst in, baseball bat in hand. But by the time he yanked open the curtain, the window was empty. Just fog from where something had been breathing. Yes, breathing. Mom insisted we were all imagining it. Dad stayed awake that night, sitting in the living room with the bat across his lap. But when the sun rose, he was pale, eyes bloodshot. He didn't say a word. That afternoon, I found him outside, staring at the scarecrow from the porch. His lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. I called out to him. He snapped out of it, looking almost ashamed, and muttered, "Your uncle wasn't crazy. Not one damn bit." That night, Emily wouldn't sleep. She clutched my hand, whispering over and over, "If it comes inside, we all die." Dad didn't talk much the next day. He barely ate, barely blinked. I kept catching him staring out the window at the field, muttering under his breath. By evening, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the walls, rain lashing against the glass, the kind of storm that swallowed the entire sky. Mom tried to distract Emily with board games in the living room, but Emily refused to leave the upstairs hallway, saying she wanted to watch the line. When I asked what she meant, she pointed through the upstairs window toward the dirt path that circled the house. "The scarecrow isn't allowed to cross it," she whispered. "Uncle Ray said that's the only thing keeping him back." Lightning flashed, illuminating the field for just a split second. My heart skipped. The scarecrow was gone. I rubbed my eyes, praying I'd just missed it in the rain. But when the next flash came, my stomach twisted. It was closer now, standing right at the edge of the dirt path, shoulders hunched, soaked burlap clinging like skin. Emily started crying, begging Dad not to go outside. But he grabbed his bat again, jaw clenched, and marched to the door. Mom screamed at him, but he growled, "If I don't stop it now, we're done for." The second the door opened, the storm howled in. Dad stepped out onto the porch, rain hammering against him. Lightning lit up the field again. The scarecrow hadn't moved. It just stood there, hat tilted low, waiting. Dad shouted into the storm, swinging the bat at the air. "You hear me? You're not coming in here. You're not—" A flash of white split the sky, and in that blinding instant, the scarecrow was gone. Dad froze, bat raised. I leaned forward at the window, eyes darting. It was standing right behind him. We all screamed. Dad spun around, but there was nothing. Just empty porch. Mom yanked him back inside and bolted the door, sobbing. Emily buried her face in my chest, whispering, "It's inside now." He crossed the line. For the rest of the night, the storm raged, but beneath the thunder, I could hear it. Soft, deliberate footsteps creaking through the house, room to room, step by step, pausing outside each bedroom door. When it stopped outside mine, I held my breath so long I nearly blacked out. Then, just as I thought the handle would turn, a whisper came through the door, low, guttural, wrong, hungry. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. Every creak, every shadow stretched too long, breathed too loud. We all huddled together in the living room, lights on, candles burning, as if that would keep it away. Dad kept the bat in his lap, knuckles white. Mom clutched Emily so tight it looked painful. I just sat staring at the front door, waiting for it to open, but it never did. Instead, the sound came from the roof. Slow, dragging steps across the shingles, straw scratching against the wood. Then silence. We barely had time to breathe before the pounding started. From inside the walls. Thud. 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 Emily screamed, covering her ears. "It's not the scarecrow," she wailed. "It's what's inside it. It wants out." The lights flickered, then died, plunging us into candlelit gloom. Dad barked for everyone to stay calm, but his voice cracked. Then the front door creaked open. The candles sputtered, bending toward the air rushing in. I swear I saw the scarecrow step through, its burlap face dripping, eyes hollow pits that seemed to pull in the light around it. Dad swung the bat with everything he had. It connected with a crack. But instead of straw bursting out, the bat splintered in his hands. The scarecrow didn't even flinch. It reached for him. Mom screamed, shoving Emily toward me. "Go! Upstairs!" I grabbed her and bolted up the stairs. Behind me, I heard a sound I'll never forget. The wet, tearing rip of something being pulled apart. Dad's scream cut off too fast. I shoved Emily into my room and locked the door. She sobbed against me, shaking so hard I thought she'd break. Then, silence. For a long, horrible minute, the house was still. No storm, no footsteps, nothing. Until a whisper slithered through the cracks of the door. "Harvest." The handle turned. I pressed myself against the door, bracing with everything I had. Emily clung to me, praying under her breath. The wood groaned. The lock snapped. And then, the scarecrow just stopped. I dared to look. Through the window, the storm clouds had broken. Dawn light spilled over the fields. And as it touched the scarecrow, it recoiled, jerking like a puppet with its strings cut. With a final shudder, it crumpled to the floor, nothing more than a pile of straw and rotting cloth. We crept downstairs at sunrise. The front door hung open, swinging in the breeze. The living room was empty. No Dad, no Mom, just the smell of earth and blood. The scarecrow was gone. Emily won't talk anymore. She just sits at the window staring at the dirt path. I asked her what she's waiting for. She finally looked at me, eyes hollow. "He's not gone. He just went back to the field." When you're broke and desperate, you don't ask too many questions. That's how I ended up with a night job on Miller's farm. It sounded easy. Keep an eye on the livestock overnight, chase off coyotes if they come near, and make sure the barn stays locked. The pay was more than decent for what sounded like babysitting animals. Miller was an old man, nearly 70, his skin like cracked leather from decades under the sun. He barely looked at me when he handed me the keys. "You don't go in the barn," he said, voice dry and sharp. "No matter what you hear, you keep that door locked." I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but his stare shut me up quick. So that was the job. Sit on a stool by the barn, shotgun leaning against the wall, thermos of coffee in hand, and watch. The first night was fine. Quiet. The cows shifted sometimes. A low groan, here or there, but otherwise peaceful. The field stretched so far I felt like I was sitting at the edge of the world. But around midnight, the fog rolled in. Thick, heavy, swallowing the fields whole. One minute I could see the fence line. The next, I couldn't even see my hand stretched out. The barn loomed behind me, its old wood creaking in the damp air. And then I heard it. A voice, low, hoarse, coming from inside the barn. "Let me out." I froze. At first, I thought it was Miller messing with me, but the voice didn't sound like him. It sounded wrong. Too deep, too ragged, like someone dragging their words across broken glass. I stood there, every hair on my body standing on end, staring at the locked door. Then the voice came again, louder this time. "So hungry." The cows in the pen stirred, shuffling nervously, their groans rising. One kicked against the fence like something spooked it. I backed away, shotgun in hand, telling myself it was just the wind, or an animal caught inside. But the voice followed me. "Please, I can smell you." I didn't make it to sunrise. I bolted, leaving the shotgun behind, and didn't stop until my truck headlights cut through the fog. When I came back the next day, Miller was waiting. He didn't ask why I ran. He just looked at me with those dead, sunken eyes and said, "You heard it, didn't you?" Story 2. The Barn in the Fog. Part 2. Miller's Secret. Miller didn't fire me. That was the first red flag. I thought for sure he'd be pissed that I abandoned the job, left the shotgun behind, and didn't finish the shift. But he just looked at me like he'd been expecting it. "You're not the first," he said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. We sat on his porch as the sun burned off what was left of the morning fog. I wanted to ask what was in the barn, but the words wouldn't come. Miller took a long drag, staring out at his fields. "My father locked it up in there," he finally said, "and his father before him. Every generation keeps the door shut. That's how it's always been." I frowned. "Keeps what in there?" He didn't answer right away. Just flicked ash over the porch railing. "Some say it was never human," he whispered. "Others say it was once. A man who did something so foul, so unspeakable, that the earth itself rejected him. They bound him, sealed him away, and the barn was built around him." I felt my stomach turn. "You're telling me that thing has been in there for over 100 years? Miller nodded, his face hollow, defeated. "It doesn't die. It doesn't age. It just hungers. That's why you heard it. It knows you're fresh. New blood always makes it louder." I didn't want to believe him. It sounded like some backwoods ghost story. But then I remembered the voice, the way it scraped against my bones, the way the animals reacted. No story could fake that. "Why keep it?" I asked. "Why not burn the place down? Bury it?" Miller's eyes finally met mine, and I wish they hadn't. They were wet, glassy, full of fear. Because if the door ever opens, it doesn't stay here. It walks and it feeds. My hands shook as I tried to steady my coffee cup. And you expect me to sit out there with that? Miller crushed the cigarette in his palm like he didn't even feel the burn. You don't sit out there for me, boy, he said, his voice dropping low. You sit out there for everyone else. The town, the world. You keep watch because if the lock breaks, you'll be the only one close enough to put it down before it gets out. A chill ran down my spine. What if I can't? He gave me a look that told me he already knew the answer. You won't. I told myself I wouldn't go back. But the next night, there I was again, lantern in hand, shotgun slung over my shoulder, trudging across Miller's fields as the fog rolled in thicker than before. It wasn't choice. It was something heavier, like a chain tied around my ribs, dragging me back to that barn. The animals knew it was coming. The cows clustered in the farthest corner of their pen, stomping nervously. The horses snorted and shook their heads, their breath pluming white in the damp night air. And then I heard it, not the deep, wet growl from the night before. This time, it was a voice. Help! Me! My feet froze. The sound had come from inside the barn. But it wasn't monstrous. It was soft, fragile, like a child's. I swallowed hard, forcing myself forward. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But the voice was so pitiful, so human, I had to be sure. Please, it whimpered again. They locked me in. I can't breathe. My hand touched the barn door, feeling the cold metal lock. It vibrated, almost imperceptibly, like the thing inside was shivering against the wood. They lie, the voice whispered. The old man lied. I'm not a monster. I'm just a man. Please, please, let me out. Tears stung my eyes before I even realized it. It sounded so desperate, so real. But then something changed. The voice cracked, deepened just for a second, like static beneath a radio signal. I can smell your blood. I yanked my hand away from the door like it had burned me. The animals were screaming now, lowing, kicking, thrashing against the fences. And the fog, it wasn't rolling in anymore. It was pressing, curling toward me like fingers reaching out. I stumbled back, lantern swinging, as the voice returned. Open the door and I'll stop the noise. Open the door and they'll be safe. You'll be safe, I ran. I don't remember making the choice, but I was sprinting across the fields, lungs burning, until I saw Miller's porch light glowing faint through the fog. When I reached his steps, he was already standing there, shotgun in hand. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. You heard it, didn't you? He said, voice flat. I nodded, still gasping. Miller looked past me toward the barn swallowed in fog. His jaw clenched. It's getting stronger. I didn't sleep that night. Even after leaving the farm, the voice clung to me. Its desperate whimpering, the sudden shift into something inhuman. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the fog curling beneath the barn door, slipping into my lungs. The next evening, Miller knocked on my door. He didn't ask if I was coming. He just said, "It's starting." I followed him, though my gut told me to pack a bag and leave town forever. The fog was already waiting when we reached the farm. It hung low and heavy, muffling the world into silence. The barn loomed in the distance, lantern light seeping faintly through the slats, though we hadn't lit anything inside. Miller handed me a second shotgun. His hands trembled as he loaded shells into his own. The lock's old, he muttered. Every year it rusts worse. Every year it holds a little less. He paused, staring towards the barn. One day, it won't hold at all. We stopped 20 feet away. The animals were thrashing, their fear almost unbearable to hear. The barn groaned, wood creaking like it was straining against something inside. Then it started again. The voice. But this time, there wasn't just one. Dozens of voices spilled out of the barn at once. Men, women, children, crying, pleading, begging. "Let us out! It's cold. They hurt me. Please, I don't want to die here." I dropped the shotgun to my side. My head spun. "Miller, there are people in there." "No!" His voice cracked sharp. "That's it! That's what it does. Don't listen." I clutched the gun tighter, my knuckles white. But the voices cut deeper, clawing into me. One of them sounded like my sister. "Tom," it whispered. "It's me. I need you." Open the door. My throat closed. She'd been gone for years, buried on a rainy afternoon when I was just a boy. I'd never heard her voice in so long, and now it rang from the barn. Warm, familiar, broken. Miller grabbed my arm. "Don't you do it! That ain't her! It ain't any of them!" The barn shook. The old wood shivered violently. The lock rattled, chains clinking. And then, snap! One of the chains snapped loose, whipping across the door. The wood bowed outward, dust spilling into the fog. The chorus of voices turned to laughter. Not human laughter. Wet, jagged, scraping sounds that didn't belong in any throat. The ground trembled beneath us. "The lock won't last much longer," Miller said. His voice was a grave. "If it breaks completely, this farm won't be enough to keep it here." The last chain rattled like a dying snake. I could see it vibrating in the lantern light, strained almost to breaking. Miller raised his shotgun, aiming at the door. His lips moved in some prayer I couldn't make out. Sweat poured down his forehead despite the freezing fog. The voices inside grew louder, no longer begging, no longer crying. They sang, a horrible harmony of human tones bent into something alien, high and low, shrill and guttural, the kind of sound that made your bones ache. The barn shuddered, and one of the hinges tore loose with a metallic scream. The door caved outward, a gap yawning wide enough for a hand, if what pressed against it could be called a hand. Gray, slick flesh. Fingers too long, bending wrong. Nails scraping across the wood, tearing grooves. "Shoot it!" Miller barked. I fired. The blast tore through the crack, splintering wood. The voices shrieked, 100 mouths screaming in unison. But the hand only withdrew a moment before returning, angrier, pressing harder. The lock screamed, a sound of metal giving way. And then it snapped. The door flung open. The fog exploded outward, swallowing us whole. And something followed it. It didn't have a shape my mind could hold. Limbs unfolded in every direction, wet skin crawling, eyes blinking across its body, eyes that closed and opened elsewhere the moment I noticed them. Its movements were jerky, like broken film frames stitched together. The voices became one. Free. I froze. My legs gave out. I thought of my sister again, thought of every name I'd ever loved, and they all poured from its throat, one after another, in perfect imitation. Miller didn't hesitate. He ran forwards, screaming, shoving the barrel of his shotgun into the thing's gaping center. He fired, once, twice, over and over until his shells were gone. It didn't kill it, but it pushed it back. The creature shrieked, stumbling into the barn again. Its form cracked, warping, folding in on itself. Miller threw down his gun, grabbed a lantern from the fence post, and hurled it inside. The barn ignited instantly. Flames consumed the dry wood, racing up the walls. The voices screamed, not from the barn, but inside my skull, as if every thought I'd ever had was being burned alive. The creature thrashed, smashing against the burning walls, but the structure held. For once, the old rotting wood worked in our favor. It collapsed inward, dragging the thing with it. The fog thinned, the screams faded, and when the last of the barn crumbled into ash, silence finally fell. Miller dropped to his knees. His face looked decades older in the firelight. He whispered, "Not gone. Just bound again." I wanted to leave. Run. Pretend I'd never set foot on this cursed farm. But as the fire burned, I realized something horrifying. Through the flames, in the collapsing wreckage, I could see the shape still writhing, still watching, still waiting. And I knew Miller was right. It wasn't gone, just waiting. When my uncle passed away, he left me a piece of land in Nebraska, 50 acres of cornfields, a rickety barn, and a farmhouse that smelled of mildew and dust. I hadn't seen Uncle Ray in years. My mother used to say he went strange after my aunt died. He stopped visiting, stopped calling, and rarely came to town. Folks said he kept to himself on the farm, muttering about the old ways and the harvest man. I always assumed it was just grief driving him into superstition. When the lawyer handed me the deed, I figured I'd sell the land. But the market wasn't kind, and curiosity tugged at me. Maybe I could renovate the place, rent it out, or at least see what kind of life my uncle had lived. So one cloudy September morning, I packed my truck and drove west. The farm sat isolated at the end of a dirt road. Cornstalks towered on both sides like walls, dry and whispering in the wind. The farmhouse leaned a little, paint peeled off in long strips. The barn, though, was worse, its red boards rotting black at the bottom, the roof sagging like it had given up. I unlocked the door. The smell of old wood and something faintly metallic hit me. Inside, dust coated everything. His things were left exactly as they had been. Boots by the door, a flannel draped over a chair, a coffee mug fossilized with dark stains. It felt like he'd just stepped out for a moment and never returned. That first night, I sat on the porch with a beer, listening to the crickets. The cornfield whispered constantly, even when the air was still. And every now and then, I thought I heard something heavier moving between the stalks. Too heavy for a raccoon, too slow for a deer. I shook it off. Country life had its own soundtrack. I just wasn't used to it. The second day, while exploring the farmhouse, I found a journal in Uncle Ray's nightstand. The leather cover was cracked, the pages brittle. His handwriting slanted like a man always in a hurry. The first entries were mundane: crop schedules, weather notes, the occasional bitter remark about neighbors who never visited. But by the middle, the tone shifted. The harvest man came again last night. Heard him in the field, dragging that sack. Don't look, Ray, don't look. Just keep the lights off. Another entry: crows won't land anymore. Even the scarecrow won't stay upright. He doesn't like it when I forget the offering. And then, scrawled almost illegibly, if I'm gone, don't stay here after dark. The corn remembers. He always comes back during harvest. My skin prickled, reading those lines. Harvest man. Offerings. A scarecrow that wouldn't stand. I told myself my uncle had gone paranoid, maybe senile, but I kept the journal anyway. Something about it unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. That evening, I walked the edge of the cornfield, the setting sun bleeding orange through the stalks. That's when I saw it. In the middle of the field stood a scarecrow I hadn't noticed before. Its frame was taller than normal, arms outstretched with crooked wooden beams. It wore moldy overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, its head a burlap sack stitched with crude black X's for eyes. But what froze me was the size. It wasn't stuffed like most scarecrows. It was too tall, too broad. From where I stood, it almost looked human. A wind picked up, and the corn bent and hissed around me. I turned back to the house faster than I'd like to admit, telling myself it was just an old scarecrow Uncle Ray had left behind. Still, that night, I locked the doors and drew the curtains. The first night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound outside, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across dirt. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The corn whispered. The dragging came again, closer, stopping just beneath my window. I held my breath. A shadow shifted against the curtain, long and angular. For a moment, I could swear I saw the outline of a man's head in a wide-brimmed hat. Then, silence. When I finally worked up the courage to peek outside, nothing was there. Just the empty yard and the dark line of cornfields swaying under the moon. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I found something on the porch. A crow, gutted and arranged neatly with its wings spread. Its black eyes stared at me, glassy and accusing. Beside it lay a burlap scrap, torn and stained dark. I remembered the journal. He doesn't like it when I forget the offering. My stomach turned. Was someone messing with me? A neighbor pulling a sick joke? Or was this something my uncle had done and someone continued after his death? The corn rustled in the distance, though the air was still. I left the crow where it was, but all day I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the field was watching me. The following days blurred together. I tried to distract myself with repairs, fixing loose shingles on the roof, patching a broken step on the porch, but my eyes always drifted to the cornfield. No matter where I stood, I felt like someone was just beyond the rows, watching me from between the stalks. On the third morning, I walked out to check the barn. Something strange caught my attention. The scarecrow had moved. It wasn't in the center of the field anymore. It now stood near the edge, closer to the farmhouse. Same burlap sack for a head, same rotted overalls, arms stretched wide. I swore it hadn't been there yesterday. I forced myself to walk toward it, my boots crunching in the dry soil. The scarecrow leaned slightly as though about to topple. Up close, the burlap face looked wet, darker around the seams. I told myself it was mold. The worst part? There were footprints in the dirt, bare human prints leading up to where the scarecrow stood, and then stopping. No return trail. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and refused to look at it again that day. That evening, just as the sun dipped low, a truck pulled into the driveway. Relief washed over me. Human company. An older man stepped out, tall, wiry, with sun-leathered skin. He wore overalls and carried himself with the ease of someone who'd worked farms his whole life. "You must be Ray's nephew," he said, voice rough but kind. "Name's Don Miller. I farm the land down yonder." I nodded. "Yeah, I just got here last week." He looked past me, toward the corn. His expression shifted, tightened. "Have you seen him yet?" "Seen who?" "The harvest man." His tone was flat, matter-of-fact, like asking if I'd noticed the weather. I stared. "You mean the scarecrow?" He spat into the dirt. "That ain't no scarecrow, son." "That's him. You'll see. Come harvest." Ray knew better than to cross him. I laughed nervously. "This is some kind of local ghost story, right?" Don didn't laugh. He leaned in close, his breath sharp with tobacco. "Listen to me. Whatever you do, don't go into that corn after dark. Don't answer when he calls your name. And for God's sake, don't forget the offering." Without another word, he climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, I tried to convince myself Don was just pulling my leg, a superstitious farmer messing with the outsider. But around midnight, I woke again. This time it wasn't dragging, I heard. It was my mother's voice. "Ethan," she called softly from the yard. I froze. My mother had been dead for 5 years. I sat in the dark, listening, every hair on my body prickling. "Ethan, come out here, please. I need you." The voice came from the corn, smooth, gentle, familiar. I almost got up, almost opened the door, but the journal's words echoed in my head. "Don't look, Ray. Don't look." I sat there trembling until dawn, never once answering. When I finally opened the door, the yard was empty, except for one thing: another crow. This one wasn't gutted. Instead, its beak was sewn shut with coarse black thread. By the 5th day, exhaustion gnawed at me. I hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time. I kept catching glimpses of movement in the corn, a tall shadow between the rows, vanishing when I looked directly at it. Finally, I decided to search the barn. Maybe I'd find some explanation, some sign my uncle had just lost his mind. The barn smelled of mold and rust. Tools hung crooked on the walls, and hay bales slumped into decay. But in the far corner, I found something stranger: a wooden box, carved with crude symbols I didn't recognize. Inside were scraps of burlap, rusted needles, spools of black thread, and dried animal bones. And at the bottom, a sack. It looked exactly like the one the scarecrow wore for a head, only this one was stained darker, stiff with old blood. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. Uncle Ray had been making them, making more heads. But for what? As I turned to leave, I heard it. A laugh, low, hoarse, right behind me. I spun around, nothing there, just the barn shadows stretching long. But when I stepped outside, the scarecrow was gone. That night, I barricaded the doors, every lock fastened. I kept the shotgun close, though I wasn't sure if it would do any good. At 3 a.m., the dragging came again. This time, it circled the house, slow, deliberate. The boards creaked under invisible weight, then knock, knock, knock on the window by my bed. I squeezed my eyes shut. A whisper: "Ethan, don't be afraid. It's time." Something thumped onto the porch. I forced myself to look. Another offering. Not a crow this time, a goat's head, fresh blood still dripping down the steps. The burlap scrap beside it was stitched with a single word in black thread: "You." I couldn't take it anymore. The bloody goat's head on my porch, the whispers, the moving scarecrow, it all pointed to one truth. Uncle Ray hadn't gone mad. He'd been feeding something. That night, with a shotgun in my hands and a lantern clutched tight, I marched toward the corn. The stalks shivered, though there was no wind. "Ethan," the voice called again, softer this time. Not my mother's, not anyone I knew, but hundreds of voices layered together, pleading and mocking all at once. Then I saw him. The scarecrow stood in the clearing, no longer slouched on its wooden post. It towered, arms stretched unnaturally wide, burlap face glistening with something wet. Its chest rose and fell like it was breathing. I raised the shotgun, fired once. The shot tore through burlap, but instead of falling, the figure laughed. The sound rattled through the stalks, shaking the whole field. Flames. That was my only chance. I dropped the lantern at its feet. Dry husks caught instantly, fire racing across the corn. The scarecrow thrashed, limbs jerking, dozens of pale hands bursting from inside the burlap, clawing outward. Its stitched mouth tore open, releasing a scream that wasn't meant for human ears. I ran, never looking back until the fire devoured everything: barn, field, scarecrow. By morning it was ash, or so I thought. When I returned to the farmhouse, something waited on the porch. A new scarecrow, smaller, dressed in my uncle's clothes, and stitched into the burlap sack of its head in rough black thread was a single word: welcome.
If you enjoyed this nightmare, like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.